Council, we first and foremost appreciate your willingness to be our police chief and, as importantly, your service as a police officer. And, in this case, what we try to do is make this as easy as possible, while understanding this might not be. But I'll kick this off just by what I'm saying. We'll go around the room and then back with 14 different questions. We've got about an hour to get through it, and we look forward to just having an open discussion and hearing your thoughts as far as being our police chief.
I look forward to it. Thank you for having me. I couldn't be more excited to be sitting here.
All right, with that, we'll go to Ms. Connie.
Okay, the first question is about management style. John, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Real quick, can I just have you guys speak into the microphone for recording purposes?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Hey, speak to the mic.
Can you please briefly describe your management style and how it will benefit our department and our community?
I'm a transformational leader. I lead through gaining consensus and getting as much input from the team as possibly can. I understand that a leader is accountable for everything that they're charged to supervise, to oversee, but I also understand that you have to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are so that you have the proper resources in place. So transformational leadership is incredibly important because we have to make sure that we reward people for doing a good job. And that's one of the best ways in the world to establish the proper culture, rather than continually trying to extinguish poor behavior, is to celebrate the stories of good behavior, the community policing events, and bringing everybody together as a team so that we're all focused with our individual aptitudes and interests and talents, but still working towards the same goal.
Thank
Can you give us an example of a time when your advice to management or others improved the organizations?
Yes, sir. Most recently, when I was promoted to major, which is our assistant chief's position, we began trying to get input from the line level officers on how we could improve recruitment and retention, because for several years, we've been having a problem with officers leaving for other professions or maybe other departments. And one of the best ways to do that, I felt, was to get the perspective from the line level personnel that were actually leaving. And what I discovered was that they wanted a better work-life balance between work and their personal life, and they wanted to do what we call a compressed work week. And I was very concerned about what that might look like for the 12-hour shifts as far as safety. So I actually did some research. I'm a member of both the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Police Executive Research Forum. They had some really good studies on 12-hour shifts and the impact on law enforcement. And after doing what essentially was scholarly article reviews, not only was I convinced that it would be safe for our officers to be able to work these 12-hour shifts, but that we would probably see an increased quality of life at home, increased work-life balance, and we implemented that back in November. So we recently did an internal survey, and across the board of the 12 questions that we asked our personnel, it was significantly positive. In the 60 to 85, 88 percentile, everything was positive along the factors that we asked. So presenting that to the organization has also helped us not only with the work-life balance, it's improved morale, and we are actually seeing an improvement in our retention levels already. Not only that, but our recruitment has stepped up for lateral officers across the state of Alabama, because they want to come to a department that has that good work-life balance. Not only that, but they have heard that we listen to our employees, we take into account what they have to say, and we give them some ownership in our organization. So it's benefited us on so many levels.
Discuss how a police department utilizes body cameras and the circumstances and timing of when body cam footage should be released or shown to those outside the police department.
Madison Police Department's had a body-worn camera program for a few years now. And the way we utilize it is every time an officer has an encounter with a citizen, whether it's an enforcement encounter or a consensual encounter or simply a community policing event, we activate those body-worn cameras so that we're capturing the data of the encounter. As far as when body-worn camera data should be released, first of all, I want to say that I do believe at some point we have to be able to release data on body-worn cameras. The question's a little more simple than the answer, though. I think there are a lot of things that we have to consider. How much do we release? In what context do we release it? When we release this footage, are we going to release just the good stuff that makes the police department look good? Are we only going to release the negative encounters with our law enforcement officers? Transparency is incredibly important, but there are a lot of things to consider with that. Who gets to make the decision on what we're going to release and how we're going to release it? You know, is it the chief of police? Is it the city attorney or city manager? That's a lot of power for one person to have. And we also have to consider when we release this data, it's out there forever. So we really have to put a lot of thought into this. If an officer responds to a scene of an active shooter in the school, do we want that data out there? Because it'll be on the internet forever. So I think that one of the things that would be the solution is for our state legislature to take a good hard look at releasing body-worn camera data. And I would advocate that they convene a blue ribbon commission of subject matter experts consisting of law enforcement, the judiciary, Alabama State Bar Association, and maybe some social psychologists, so that we'd have a better understanding of how the data that we are releasing might impact the psyche of our society. And only after that, to put forth well thought out, well-informed legislation that would make it consistent across the state of Alabama as to how we release body-worn camera data, that we're not impeding prosecutions or tainting a potential jury pool when we release that information. So as much as I think that yes, transparency is absolutely important, it's our job to educate the public that transparency is not immediacy, that there is a time to release it. But I think there needs to be a consistent standard across the state of Alabama. And I think the legislature is the proper place to start.
So budgets are always tight in Madison, as well you know. Can you give us some examples on how you've stretched any budgets in the past for the best success?
Yes, sir. So one of the things that we do to stretch our budget is, I think the city actually has a pretty clean, simplified budgeting system. And what we've begun doing within the police department is prioritizing how we spend our money, and it's based on performance budgeting and performance management. Now, if we have things that we need to spend money on, such as equipment or specialized programs that go beyond our regular line items, then the supervisors or the division commanders that want to purchase those items or want to begin specialized programs, they're required to submit a justification for it. And that justification has to tell us how it supports the mission of the Madison Police Department to serve and protect our citizens and to enhance the quality of life. And if it doesn't sufficiently articulate it, then that's something we're not going to be able to do. And another way that we've been able to stretch the budget is through seeking outside funding, through federal grants and state grants. I'm a grant writer and grant manager, and quite frankly, when COVID hit, we didn't have the funds to be able to buy the personal protection equipment and sanitizer that we were going to need for it. I'm currently managing a COVID relief grant now where we were able to do that. We were also able to purchase technologies that allowed our supervisors and our detectives to be able to work off-site instead of a big open-air bullpen office where they'd be sharing the same air without having to take any of the quality services and investigations away from our citizens.
Major, can you describe a time when you were able to identify a complex problem, evaluate the options, and implement a solution?
I've been assistant chief for about 2 weeks, and the chief was actually out of the state in training, but I was notified that we had a critical incident with an officer-involved shooting. And from my experience in law enforcement, I have been on both sides of those, on both sides of the officer-involved shooting. I've been on scenes where officers have had to discharge their weapons. And I was also the commander of internal affairs and had to investigate it. So, excuse me. So I knew that there would be a lot of issues, a lot of moving parts, and there would be certain things that we had to make sure that we had plans for and to mitigate. Obviously, the very first thing was, I had to get the information from the on-scene supervisor, and I understood that the subject was deceased, which meant that we would have to make sure that we had objective outside investigations and crime scene rules. So the first thing that I did, however, was make sure that I made proper notifications to my chief and to the mayor and advised them that I keep them updated throughout the evening. I also realized that the media would be getting that information, and we'd have to accommodate them to be able to get information out to them and put them in a good place where we could stage them. And knowing the geography of the area, I knew that there was an area where we could stage the media, that they could get the shots that they needed without impeding the investigation. But most importantly is, I remember that one of the major complaints from Ferguson, Missouri was that the body of Michael Brown was allowed to lay in the street for an extended period of time before investigators arrived or crime scene. And we're not just the guardians of people's rights and liberty, but also their dignity. And I knew that we had to make sure the scene was investigated objectively, but also expeditiously. I was very familiar with the Madison County Sheriff's Office investigators, their capabilities. They have probably the best crime scene in the state of Alabama, so the best equipment I've ever seen. I knew that they would be on scene in about 30 to 40 minutes, and that they would do a good job. So we requested them. And then I also realized there'd be a lot of internal working parts. I used my command staff. I called them in and I gave them special assignments. Liaison with the Sheriff's Department. One division commander was assigned to make sure that our personnel that were involved in the incident were taken care of, that they had peer support officers. Another was making sure that they had all the information to be able to give them on counseling, our EAP services, and our chaplains were called in so we could do debriefings with them. And we explained to them exactly what they could expect in the coming days with the critical incident investigation. So it was a matter of making sure that we were organized and making sure that all those separate pieces were taken care of, that the media was informed, that our public was informed, that our city leaders stayed informed, and that we took care of processes and policies within the department as well.
Thank you, sir.
Please describe a time when you dealt calmly and effectively with a high-stress situation.
I hate to say incident, but I would say that was probably within the last 2 years, probably the highest stress incident that I've had to deal with. And I'll tell you very briefly how I dealt with it. For years, I used to teach classes to police officers and even our teachers in our city school systems on mental preparation for confrontations. And the idea is the body only successfully goes where the mind has already been. And this applies to everything from street level law enforcement to supervision to executive leadership. When I was a captain, I often wondered if I was left in charge of the police department and we had a critical incident, whether it was an officer-involved shooting, an on-duty fatality, how would I address that? So I mentally rehearsed the steps that I would take and the processes that I would take, so that when those events occurred, it wasn't the first time that I had been there. So when this call came out, I was able to take a deep breath and rely on those things that I had done in my past to be able to prepare this, and based it on policy and procedure as well as Alabama state law. And it helped me to keep perspective on that critical incident.
All right. Describe your experience developing, implementing, or modifying a strategic plan or similar plan document.
So to date, the Madison Police Department, in my 24 years of employment, we had never had a strategic plan. And that's actually one of the things that I want to do. If you look in your folders, one of the first things that you'll see is I have a 90-day plan that we'll implement within right after taking office. And towards the end of that 90-day plan, not only will we formalize strategic planning as a policy, but we'll begin that strategic plan. I have attended several classes on strategic planning for law enforcement, and I absolutely believe that strategic planning will help us to effectively manage our budget in years to come, prioritize how we want to spend our money, base it on the mission and a vision statement that we need to develop and articulate for our employees and our citizens to let people know where we're going to be in 3 to 5 years. So those are things that we're currently working on. The planning that I have done within the police department has been more tactical planning to date, whether it is for special events or a 6 to 12 month planning for recruitment policies and procedures.
This one is about community outreach stuff. Regarding compassionate policing, community policing, and citizen protection. How do all of those look under you as chief of police for the city of Madison?
The tenets of both procedural justice and 21st century policing are based on the idea of community outreach and community policing to ensure that we have rapport, relationships, and transparency with the public. For me, one of the first things that I want to do within that first 30 days is to establish a community policing program that will be no cost to the city. I think that it's important for us, and it's actually in the goals and objectives that are in your folder as well, that we have meaningful out-of-the-car experiences at least once a shift with all of our officers. Non-enforcement, but communicating with our public. The idea is that the public are the police and the police are the public. We police with consent of the community, and if we're not maintaining those relationships as a course of how we do business, then we're going to lose that consent. We need to have open, honest discussions with our citizens, take opportunities to be able to bring them into solutions on quality of life in our city so that we can prevent criminal activity from ever occurring. Because I think the true measure of success for community outreach and community policing is with our public exposing any blind spots that we have to how we operate and do business, is we can get better and we can not focus on how many arrests we make or how many citations we issue, but how many of those we never have to issue in the first place. So those are the things that I think that are important about community outreach. But I think that it's also important that we institute and begin following the procedural justice program where we understand that everybody deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, that we are their police officers, that there is no police and civilians, we're all civilians. And we're doing the job that is really the duty of all citizens in the U.S. We're just entrusted with the specialized powers to be able to enforce laws. Anytime we have an encounter with our public, they need to have a voice. Even if it's an enforcement encounter, when it's safe to do so, we'll listen to our citizens and explain to them why we've done what we've done and why we've taken the action that we have so that people feel that the law has been enforced evenly across the board, regardless of who they are, even if they don't like the or agree with the enforcement outcome.
So my question is going to be about something we hate happens, but it does, and it's about mistakes. You know, as a leader, you always have mistakes, and you learn from them. So can you give us an example of when you made a mistake and when you learned from it, or how you rectified it?
Yes. One of the lessons that I learned from the critical incident that I discussed earlier was use your resources that are available to you. So I was the only certified public information officer in the department at the time. And I was juggling a lot of moving parts and trying to organize and thinking about how we were implementing our policies and procedures on those sorts of things. And I gave an initial statement to the media. We put out an initial press release to the public to know what was going on. And I told the media that we would give them regular updates, and that's something that fell off the table. So the lesson that I learned with that is when the mayor asked me, what can I do for you? What can I do to help you? I should have asked him to send in our city communications specialist to help me with that sort of thing. Because it was probably 6-8 hours into the event before I was able to even begin typing up a press release and send it out. If I had recognized that resource and I had used that resource, I wouldn't have had to operate at the line level. I could have continued to operate at the administrative level from the 30,000 foot perspective. We could have coordinated through the communication specialist to put out updates and respond to media requests, even if it was, I'm sorry, we don't have anything to give you right now, but we could have continued to make sure that they were taken care of, and we could have gotten that press release out in a more timely manner. And not only that, we could have ensured that there was a consistent message from both the communication specialist side on the following day, as well as what we were releasing to the police department that evening. So that was a big lesson learned, is use the resources that are available to you and think outside the box and make sure that you understand that those resources are not always directly within your police department.
Thank you.
If selected, based on your research and review of our department, what would you expect to face as your most significant challenges in leading this department, both internally and in the community at large?
Our most significant internal challenges continue to be recruitment and retention. As I mentioned already, our retention has begun to level off, and we're seeing some positive results with some of the things that we're doing, like our policy review committees, including our officers on reviewing policies that our CALEA certification requires a review anyway. It gives them stake and ownership in the department. It's hard to leave a place that you feel like you're building. But I think also the solution to our recruitment and retention issue is recruitment for diversity, so that we are reflecting the demographics of the communities that we serve. Our first accreditation, we had a pretty good representation of our community. And I was reviewing this back in October of last year, and I realized we're trending backwards a little bit on that. So I think the solution to it is we partner with our human resources experts and get their advice, follow their leadership on how we can better recruit for diversity. Some of the other things that I think are going to continue to be a challenge is the economic impact that COVID-19 has had on budgeting. I'm not saying that it's a bad budget. It's a conservative budget, and it's the right thing to do. So I understand that it's probably going to be a while before we look at increasing budgets significantly. And we're good with that because the department is all together. We're all on mission, and we support the overall mission of the city. But that's why it is going to be so important for strategic planning to be developed as a policy and continued strategic planning on a regular basis, so that we understand what we need on a yearly basis and how we're going to be able to spend that money. Some of our external challenges, they involve the national media and the impact that it has on police and and community relations. Regardless of, we have a really good relationship with the community in the city of Madison. But if you hear things enough over and over, then it gets into the psyche, and you begin to raise an eyebrow and wonder is that how it really is? And it becomes a socialization factor. One of the ways that we can continue to maintain that good, positive relationship with our communities is to maintain a good liaison with our local media. And that offsets the story of the national media, I think. The rapid growth that we have in this general area is another external factor that we have to deal with. And I think the city is doing a really good job of addressing growth within city limits and making efforts to control it. But other jurisdictions are maybe not doing that. And we begin to see shrinking jurisdictional boundaries, and criminals don't stop at city limits. The same criminals that operate in Huntsville's jurisdiction or Decatur's are operating in Madison. The partnerships that we developed over the last nearly quarter of a century working here at the police department continue to be essential in addressing this criminal activity. And the information sharing is going to be incredibly important. And one of the ways that we're going to be able to facilitate that is the new Metro Records Management System that should be up and running by the end of the year. And that's going to allow for almost real-time information sharing in criminal activity. The rapid growth also means that our community is going to continue to be more and more diverse. So it's incredibly important that we maintain liaison with those diverse communities within the city of Madison. And I think one of the best ways we're going to be able to do that, and this is something that I work hard on and I'm really excited about, is our citizen advisory committee. I mean, it looks like it's a really good representation of our community. And we have people who have some really good ideas, some really good questions. It will open up new conversations and hopefully expose blind spots where maybe we think we're serving these diverse communities really well, and maybe we're not. Maybe our presentation is not what it should be. So those are the ways that I think we mitigate those challenges that we already have here in the police department.
Could you tell us about a time that you had to make a controversial decision? How did you weigh your options, and what was the result?
The officer-involved shooting that I mentioned, I was questioned by members of command staff as to why I didn't invest the Alabama law enforcement agency to come work the city. I knew at that time they were undergoing some restructuring. Wasn't real sure about the internal communications, but I also knew that to be able to call out the state meant that there would be an extended estimated time. And again, one of the things that I considered was, how do we make sure that this event is investigated properly, investigated professionally and objectively, but also with due regard for the common ground and how long that scene would be open. I was concerned not only about how it would impact our city, but also how it would impact the family of the person who's involved. Part of our job is to be compassionate and respect the individual. So that's the reason that I requested the sheriff's department to come work with me, because of their capabilities, because of their professionalism, because of their expediency. I also had people question me as to why I didn't assign our own investigations to work this scene. And that's one of the worst things that I think you can probably do on a scene like that, is to investigate yourself. We need to be able to turn that over to a third-party, neutral, objective, investigative authority and maintain transparency. I have worked under chiefs in the past who decided that we were going to investigate our own critical incidents against the advice of command staff. And it was disastrous for the department. And part of what we had to do as a young leadership team was to recover from that and to unify the department and bring us to where we are today. And I decided then that I would never make that kind of decision. So that's a lesson I learned from somebody else's mistake.
Thank you.
Major, in your experience, what is the key to ensuring our police department is compliant with all laws, regulations, and standards in your areas of responsibility?
The key to ensuring that kind of compliance is leadership. It's leadership from the top down. The chief of police sets the tone for training and policy in the department, as well as culture and how it's applied. There's an old saying that an organization does well with the boss inspects. And CALEA, the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, gives us a mechanism to ensure that we're checking up on what our officers are doing, that we're following procedure, that we're following policies, that we're keeping up with appropriate training, that we are doing our own research on best practices in law enforcement, that we're a member of organizations like PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, the IACP, that provides model policies, that provides training on implicit bias and cultural awareness, that we are engaging in the de-escalation techniques. All those things are so important for a law enforcement agency today. To be able to provide professional police services, you've got to constantly be a learning culture. And that has to be set at the very top of the organization.
Thank you.
Can you share an example of a time you utilized statistics or data to develop a plan of action for positive results?
Yes, I can. Several years ago, when I was the commander over the investigations division, we were having some issues with hotels along Madison Boulevard that had a lot of criminal activity going on. So I began collecting the crime stats. I had been to the criminal intelligence course at the FBI National Academy in 2015. It was one of the courses that I took. And that's some of the stuff they taught us how to do, was to be able to gather crime statistics and be able to interpret them. So we collected all of the crime statistics from these hotels. And one of the things that we learned in doing that is that one of our local hotels had become a haven for, say haven, but it became a home for registered sex offenders. And they were in violation of that because they were living within a 500-foot radius of either school or daycare. And that's direct violation. So there were a lot of things that were going on. But we took those statistics, we monitored them, we brought it before the city council, working with our legal department. And as a result of that, we were able to leverage those statistics to ensure that the owners clean the areas up. And now our calls for service are way down. They're down in the 65-75 percentile range since we worked on this and we took that crime data and we applied it and we presented it to legal and we presented it to the city council. And we're just not having the issues in those hotels that we had in the past.
Can you share a time when your attention to detail had a positive impact on your department?
Yes, with the announcement of some of the venues and hotels and residents that were coming to town Madison, I had been to a professional certification course on performance management and performance budgeting at the Southeastern Police Institute at the University of Louisville. And one of the things that we learned to do was a staffing analysis based on population, based on calls for service, and based on times in service and out of service. And we began working with city planning to determine how many residents we might have in that area, but also what our population might fluctuate with visitors that would be staying in our hotels, and what kinds of criminal activity might occur in those areas. And this was something that I did on my own initiative. And we were able to determine that we would need additional officers in the future, and within 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years, which is probably the closest we've ever come to the strategic plan for the department. But it took a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of research, and a lot of attention to detail. And as a result of that, we were able to add additional personnel to the ranks of the police department. So as we begin to hire personnel and fill out our staff, that's going to benefit the department and the city, and bring value to the Madison area as well.
Awesome. Well, that's going around twice. I don't know if that sounds like 30 minutes or 30 years, but as we close, I'll give you the last minute, and I'll give every one of the candidates the last minute to kind of talk to this council and wrap up kind of this and let them know why you feel like you're the best candidate for our chief of police position.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be considered for Madison City Council. I want you to know that I don't want to be just the chief of police. There are police chiefs openings across the nation on a daily basis. I want to be Madison's chief of police. I have invested 24 years of my life in this department, and I've worked hard. I'm from the Madison County area. I raised my family here, and I have a vested interest in its continued development. I'm proud to be a Madison police officer. I'm honored to be a leader of Madison police officers. It is one of the greatest honors and privileges that I've ever had. It's one of the best blessings I've ever had, and it's also some of the greatest challenges I've ever had in my life. A lot of sleepless nights when I worry about my police officers being safe and how they're taking care of our citizens. When I was hired 24 years ago, the chief of police then told me, if you come in and you do a good job, you work hard, you get your education, you get as much experience as you possibly can. He looked at me and he said, son, one day you can be chief of police. And I believed it. And that's exactly what I've done. I have learned from my mistakes. I've owned them. I'm humble enough to know when I'm not right. I work with people. I've developed relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies here in North Alabama over that 24-year period that are already there. We don't have to pump the brakes and reset and develop new policies, new procedures, or new relationships. Our department is unified. We are on a mission. Our officers believe in the mission. Our command staff believes in the mission. And we are set to become the best police department in the state of Alabama. I think our citizens deserve that. That's what I want to be a part of. This is my passion. This is what I was called to do in my life. And there's no other place that I want to lead, that I want to continue to invest in the Madison Police Department. And, you know, I'm 48 years young. I could have retired last year, but I'm just getting started. And we have some amazing things that we can do in this police department. We have a command staff that works for the Madison Police Department, that everything they do is governed by our mission. And we take extreme ownership of what we do. And one of the points of my vision that's actually in the folder is that our employees would be enthusiastic owners of the mission. And I think that that's what our citizens deserve. I've spent 24 years building strong relationships and bonds with the citizens in our community too. There's no other place that I want to lead than be a police chief in the city of Madison.
Well, on behalf of this council, we thank you for your time and service, and appreciate your time here today. Thank you. Well, good to have you here today.
Thank you, sir.
You know, first and foremost, we appreciate your time and your willingness to talk to us for the police chief position, and as importantly, we appreciate your service. As kind of the first time that we did this, in this case, there's 14 questions. When I get done, I'll hand it off to Ms. Connie, and we'll go around, and we'll come back around again. It's the same format as we had before. So we want to have the ability to give you an open-ended question and let you go from there.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, as I do, I'll give this to her.
Thank you. Can you please briefly describe your management style and how it will benefit our department and community?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
First, I thank you all for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be considered for your next chief of police. Really, when you talk about management styles, I don't have a management style. I tend to refer to it as a leadership style. One of my mentors at DEA from years ago, one of the senior executives, told me, he said, Clay, you lead every day and manage only when you have to. And I've tried to live by that creed ever since then, and certainly in the leadership position that I've held prior to today. And really, when you look at that leadership style, I have a servant leadership style. I'm a servant leader. And people oftentimes say, well, they don't understand. Well, what is a servant leader? It's very simple. I put the needs and the mission of the men and women of the Madison Police Department and the community above the needs of myself. You put others first. And people often think, well, when you do that, how do you handle adversity? Right? It's very simple. Like a true servant leader easily handles adversity. They focus on the facts. They're honest. They're humble. They're open. They're transparent. And they listen to needs. Whether it's internal to the police department or external to members of the community, you approach those issues in the same way. And when you talk about a servant leader in my style, I would hope to be inspirational. I would hope to be transformative for the police department, for the city. And if I'm inspirational and transformative, that's going to lead the men and women of this police department to provide better service for the community. And that is really all centered on building a culture. A servant leader will build a culture of trust, responsibility, goals, direction, being humble in our service, being professional, being intelligent in our actions, and those qualities is what I try to bring as a servant leader to the community and to the city of Orange.
Mine's about continuous improvement. Can you give us an example of a time when your advice to management led to an improvement of the organization's product?
Sure. One that comes to mind is when I was reassigned to be the Assistant Special Agent in charge for the state of Alabama for DEA. In 2012, when I got to our office, I immediately realized that there were several issues within the office of our productivity was not on par. We had some relationship issues with other agencies, but some relationship issues with 2 United States attorneys across the state. And so I immediately developed a plan to start to mend those relationships and work on the quality investigation we did and not focus on the quantity. One of the things that I immediately did when I first got there, I made meetings with the 3 United States attorneys across the state. I met with them and their staff and I explained my vision and my direction that I would place for DEA and what I would focus on. I asked them to give me time to build rapport back with their offices, which they gracefully did. And then after I did that, I met with multiple chiefs and sheriffs across the state because we had some issues in some very specific departments that did not like DEA and things that we had done in the past. I met with those chiefs and sheriffs, again, I introduced myself, I explained my background, I explained once again the goals and directions that I would have DEA follow, that we would work the highest level investigations across the state of Alabama that we could possibly do. We would use when you look at the investigation of drug trafficking, we would want to take out an entire organization from the root to the stem, right? So it helps us at the community level, the regional level, national, international level. That was not being done by DEA prior to my arrival. And I focused and used that. I've used it over the years, wire communication in a sense to facilitate that. So I implemented that plan within DEA across every office in the state. Now, once I spoke with our external members, I went to internal with DEA. I spoke to every supervisor first. I explained my vision, my goals, and my directions for them. I gave them some specific instructions what I wanted them to do. Then I met with our agents and task force officers. Look, I can talk to supervisors, but I need to get down and speak to the agents and the officers. And I want to instill in them what I would like for us to do with DEA. And my main job was for them to give them the support that they need, right? And if you support your people, and they know that you're not looking out for yourself, you're looking out for them first, they will buy into your programs. And our programs were very successful. We immediately had a significant increase in the number of investigations that we initiated at a high level. We initiated cases that were regional in nature that had to be approved by a committee in Atlanta. Those were successful and those were approved. We led our division in the establishment of high-level investigations that are approved by that committee. And that division would be the New Orleans Field Division for DEA, which encompasses 4 states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Alabama. So we led our entire division in the establishment of those connections to those large investigations regionally. We also established the first connections to international cases out of the Birmingham office in a substantial amount of time. We increased our wire intercepts, which led to more significant arrests of major violators, really over 200%. One, the mission was well received. Two, I turned around the perception of DEA. I quickly made us the subject matter expert across the state, which we needed to be. And it really showed both internally and externally that we're here to help them. And it worked out well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Discuss how a police department utilizes body cameras and the circumstances and timing of when body cam footage should be released or shown to those outside the police department.
Yes, sir. Well, as a matter of practice and daily operation, our body cameras should be used all the time when we're on calls, right? I think that's non-negotiable. When you talk about when we release video, we want to be as transparent as possible with the community, right? That's one of the things that we need to build upon is how we interact with our communities and transparent. Look, across the nation is a critical time, not just here in Madison. It's our entire country that are crossroads with law enforcement. And that transparency is critical. And people demand seeing your video footage of what is happening. Look, and quite frankly, we always focus on the negative side of our videos, right? We never show the positive interactions. So everything that we see and we release is a negative interaction with the police department. So I think that's one thing that we need to look at. Now, when you release that video, it's subject to a couple things. One is going to interfere with a major investigation. It's going to violate some rights that we need to look at. And quite frankly, you need to look at the policy within your department, in your city, and see what that policy allows us to do. And then third, we need to talk to investigating agents who might be investigating one of our officers and have discussions with them about releasing that video and work in concert with them. Yes, sir.
So my question is about budgets. So budgets in Madison are always tight. Can you give an example of how you've stretched your budget for the best success?
Yes, sir, I can. Thank you. Throughout my career in leadership positions with DEA, I've been responsible for large budgets ranging from $1.5 million to $32 million. And I always prided myself in being able to find alternate funding sources, right? Because your budget's only goes so far, and that's no different with the federal government. In several programs and instances, one specifically, I was over DEA's worldwide radio communications program. And I was able to really expand that budget by about $9 million 1 year. The end budget was $32 million, but I went to alternate sources within the Department of Justice, not just DEA, because I knew that there was funds available. And DEA, like most government agencies, right, we don't spend our money across the board across the year. We have a large pot of money at the end of the year that you have to spend immediately. Personally, I don't think that's where we should use our budget, but that's just what happens in reality. So in one instance, I was able to give $7.5–9 million extra to a budget. That budget ended up being $32 million. Another example is where it had never been done before, where when I was at our headquarters office at the Office of Investigative Technology, as you all know, technology is very, very expensive, and we have to find ways to fund those purchases. I started looking at asset forfeitures across the country, and I combined the success of the asset forfeitures across the country. I presented that to the Department of Justice as a reason for us to use the asset forfeiture fund as another budget mechanism to augment my budget, and it did. And at that time, years ago, that was several years ago, that was the first time that approach had been done. Actually, let's look at the results of what we've done. Let's bring that to another funding agency and show them how their money could be used in a positive way to augment our budget. I've done that on several occasions.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Agent Morris. Can you describe a time when you were able to identify a complex problem, evaluate the options, and implement a solution?
Yes, ma'am. Throughout my career, there have been several complex problems that we've had to address. One of the very difficult issue I had was another time when I was at our headquarters, our office in Washington, D.C. I was in charge of our polygraph program. And the DEA polygraph program is probably one of the most hated programs in DEA because it causes such an issue with our applicants and who they're hiring. Because if they fail the polygraph by national and federal standards, if they fail the polygraph, they're never considered again to be an applicant for DEA. And that caused huge issues across DEA at the senior executive level because field divisions across DEA, they vet their candidates, and they send those candidates to headquarters to finalize that process. Well, one of about the middle of the process is the polygraph, and we fail a lot of people on our polygraph test. actually I should say they've done themselves, our examinations in administrative tests. But senior executives across DA did not know that. So when I got to that program, and I did not like that program when I got there, I quickly learned that I was wrong. I quickly learned that we had polygraph examiners who knew what they were doing. They knew how to effectively administer that exam, and it weeded out very, very bad candidates for us that without that exam we wouldn't have known that there would have been an issue. So what I did was I established an outreach program in the DEA to explain to the senior executives the nature of the polygraph program, the procedure of the polygraph program, what we could tell them, and then one of the things I thought was most successful during meetings, I would have volunteer, not pick someone at training sessions, have them come up, and we would put polygraph tests on them, and we would have them pick a number and not tell our examiner, and they would write the number down, put it in their pocket, and the examiner would take them through the test, and then he would tell them, okay, your number is number 7, and he was right every time because of the questions he asked and the responses were different. And I think when you can show someone a visualization of something, right, that's hugely impactful. And that was very successful. They still didn't care for the polygraph program, but they were open to understand, maybe I don't know everything about that. And when I tell you they don't like the polygraph program, they don't like it. So at least they would listen. At least they knew I was trying to show them this was a good tool, and they listened. So that's one thing.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Please describe a time when you dealt calmly and effectively with a high-stress situation.
In high-stress situations, just one recently. Let me go back a little bit. So one high-stress situation, I was a group supervisor in DEA. I was out with my family for dinner at a Pryor girl, and I got a call from one of my captain's officers. And for those that don't know the organization DEA, we had special agents who were DEA agents, and then we deputized state, local, county, city police officers. We deputized them and they work with us full time. So they have the same authority as DEA agents. So I was sitting there with my wife, and I get a call from our staff officer, Fuzzy. Fuzzy called me and said, "Boss, hey, Fuzzy, what's going on? You guys just killed a man." So, "Hey, Fuzzy, tell me what's going on." And I didn't crack at all. And not the whole world around me stopped, right? He said, "Boss, I ran over." I said, "Okay, Fuzzy." I said, "Fuzzy." My first question was, "Fuzzy, are you sure he's dead?" And he said, "Boss, he's dead." I said, "Hang on, Fuzzy." And he lived way out. He lived an hour out from the city. That's Fuzzy, where you at? He told me. I said, "Hang on, Fuzzy. Hang on. Don't hang on the phone. I got my wife's phone. I called my backup supervisor." I said, "Joey, here's what's happening. Get our entire group to take in Fuzzy right now." Because I was the furthest person. I was on the opposite side of Nashville from him, so I was about an hour and a half away. So I started coordinating with my immediate supervisor under me who could get there quickly. I had support get to Fuzzy, his name's Richard, from Richard. I had support get him as fast as we could, because he's literally standing out in the middle of the country on the side of the road with a man who's from over. So we got to Fuzzy, by the time we had a law enforcement response. We get there at the same time I'm having to, we have protocols for who actually notifies our officers of death. And I'm notifying my supervisor. I'm starting to get information because I know headquarters, you have to notify them in 60 minutes to Washington, and they're going to have 1,000 questions for practice, so they would. I'm starting to work that as I'm getting out to the scene. We get to the scene, we ensure we have an officer, an agent with Fuzzy at all times. I make liaison with local law enforcement, the accident investigation. I help them. They take what they need from Fuzzy, and they take obviously some blood samples from him. We get him squared away with that under our policies and guidelines. Also have to make liaison with Fuzzy Sheriff, who's a task force officer. So I talk to the sheriff, the chief deputy, we inform them. They quickly said, "Well, please handle that for us." So we did, and we should. We handled that for Fuzzy. We got him out. We promised to secure the scene. And the tragic part about the story is how you handle this thing is that any loss of life is terrible. Fuzzy hit a law enforcement officer who had just come home. And he crossed the dark road in his dark blue uniform, and he didn't see him. And the guy was checking his mail, and he turned around and stepped back in the street, stepped out from our task officer's car. So that was just made it more traumatic for our officer. And that was in the very short term what we did. There was a process after that. The next day, our liaison to state police under the investigation. We have agents assigned to those at all times. We have in DEA, we have a trauma team response who's there for that employee. We get them involved with us. We activate our employee assistance program the next day. Our entire group went with him to his debriefing. We talked to our psychologist, and it's a very positive environment for our employees there. And then we work through the process until he was finally ready to start with the homicide. So that's one, if that answers the question. Yes, sir.
Hey, good morning. Describe your experience developing, implementing, or modifying a strategic plan or a similar plan document.
Is a document or yeah, one more time.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, sir.
no, you're fine, you're fine. Describe your experience developing, implementing, or modifying a strategic plan or a similar plan document.
Sure. On a strategic level, we have what we call tactical intelligence and strategic intelligence, or documents or plans. When I went back here in Birmingham, when I got here, and there were still experiences today, we have an opioid epidemic across the country. It's been here for years, and it's actually gotten worse this year. So strategically, from a planning perspective, no one, it's shocking how much the public does not know there's a problem. And while I'm addressing a problem of the supply of opioids of various types, we have to come up with a plan, devise and develop a plan to engage the community and let our community stakeholders know that there's a problem. Look, drug addiction, drug abuse, it's a misnomer, right? People don't want to talk about it. 7 years ago, no one knew anyone affected from an opioid overdose. Today, everybody knows about it. So implementing a strategic plan for that, we took a multi-level approach. One, we need to deal with the illicit drugs of opioids, fentanyl, and heroin, which started like your cycle of addiction across Alabama. So I took 2 groups of DEA agents. I assigned them to work a short-term and long-term investigation in the region on local, street level, retail, and wholesale heroin traffickers in Jefferson County and Shelby County, which has never been done. So we start our initiative and our investigation and our strategic plan at that level through that illicit source of heroin. That was highly successful. We left the U.S. Attorney's Office, chiefs and sheriffs in the region. We had them work with us after really executing about 130 undercover heroin purchases. Then we moved from those purchases to start listening to the traffickers' cell phones. We moved up a level to a more retail, to a wholesale level. We identified their suppliers. Throughout that initiative, we executed 9 pilots through intercepts on different heroin traffickers' phones. That led to the culmination of an indictment, federal indictment, 51 defendants in Birmingham. That was one of the largest indictments in recent history at that time, all based on heroin trafficking to be phase 1 of how we attack the opioid epidemic. It was successful. The most critical part of that part of the investigation, the initiative, and the strategic plan was we started looking at heroin overdose deaths and what can we do with these victims. And throughout that investigation, we were successfully able to charge 2 individuals with distribution results of the death. 2 individuals in Birmingham. That was the first time that particular federal statute ever been used in Alabama and Northern Alabama. It was successful charging those 2 individuals for that. And I can tell you, speaking of traumatic incidents, critical incidents, when you talk to parents whose young children die of overdose death, and you tell them that you just arrested 2 individuals that were responsible for their death, it's very impactful. We were able to do that. Phase 2 of that strategic plan was to look at the opioid epidemic from a prescription drug model. During that phase, which we initiated in Alabama and started throughout our district, our 4 states, we started looking at road doctors, pill mills, pharmacies who were abandoning their practice. In Alabama, we like to be known in football. We do not like to be known in the number of prescription opioids that we have across the state. And we ranked in the top 10 for many years in that category. It's just that the public doesn't know. So we started identifying and really working with investigations on road doctors. At the culmination of phase 2, we arrested 35 individuals who are on the prescription pill side of distribution. 35 individuals, 5 doctors. A very successful case of that one was Dr. Cash and Blue on that national attention. we took in charge of the doctors of violations of the RICO statute. That was the first time in the United States that a doctor had been charged with the RICO statute. They were successfully convicted at trial, receiving in excess of $12 million of gained assets in that phase of that strategic plan that tackled the problem. And then finally, the third part of that plan was to engage the public. Right? We have to. The public still to this day, the public doesn't realize how bad the opioid problem is. And if you look at the pandemic and COVID from last year, our numbers were higher last year after the in 2019 of opioid overdoses across the country. They raised during the pandemic in 2020. And this week in Jefferson County alone, they already doubled the number of opioid overdoses they had this time last year. So we're going to see the surge come back. So we have to be prepared for that here in Madison as well. But engaging the public, we met with community stakeholders, school organizations, teachers. We did radio interviews, TV interviews. We traveled and had some small town hall meetings that people want to get the word out. And one, what we're doing, and two, you do not know you have a problem. You've got a terrible problem of opioid addiction, drug distribution, which is always open to that sector. So that is a kind of strategic plan that went about it. That is a plan that we
Microphone just a little bit closer to you. Let's everybody else in the back here.
Okay.
You're fine. If they showed up, I wouldn't be able to hear.
Regarding compassionate policing, community policing, and citizen protections, how do all of these look under you as chief of police for the city of Madison?
They're a priority for any chief of police in any city in the country, especially in Madison. Community engagement, being empathetic with people, right? Look, law enforcement officers and police officers have a huge influence on how things happen in our community, right? Are they here to protect? Absolutely, they're here to protect us. But they're also here to partner with people, right? We have to be empathetic to people. We have to be empathetic to people's problems. Look, you're a law enforcement officer, you're the men and women in this department, they get called and see people at their worst. They're expected to address the situation at people's worst. And as I go back to being a servant leader, you need to have a servant police department. You need to be service oriented and build your relationship with the community on trust and mutual respect. Somewhere across this country, we've lost just the common decency of being respectful people. And those are pillars to what we would do as a police department. Yes, ma'am.
And my question is, they always tell me speaking to the mic because I'm humble and I don't speak to the mic, so apparently you have to do the same thing.
Yes, sir, and I will.
So mine is about an uncomfortable thing. It's about mistakes. And if you could give some example of a mistake you made and what caused it, how you rectified it, please.
Sure. Being a little OCD and being a perfectionist, it's difficult, right? My wife says I'm going to kill myself trying to do everything perfect. So a mistake, right? So throughout the years, we all make mistakes. No one is perfect. And I've made my share, and I'll probably continue to make my share. One of the mistakes, really being a law enforcement leader, we had a difficult relationship with a very large department in the state. And I worked terribly hard to mend that relationship. And I really, to this day, it's one of the things I failed at. I didn't completely mend it. And I know the executive that's in charge of that department. I consider him a friend, and he considers me a friend. But when you have large numbers of people under you, it's difficult for all those people to get along. And at one point, I backed one of my agents in his version of an issue. And in the end, I come to find out that was wrong. And his position was not accurately relayed to me. And it was a mistake of mine not getting the exact information from that agent. It was not a mistake to back my agent. I would think I would be known as a protector of the people who work for me. I think anyone that's ever worked for me would tell you that. But it was a mistake for me not to get every fact from him that I needed to make the call that I made to speak to that other agency. And it hurt our relationship, quite frankly. And I worked tirelessly to try to mend that relationship. Because at the end of the day, we can all be subject matter experts. We can all have all the experience we need and have. But at the end of the day, it is about relationships, no matter what the situation we're dealing in. And I had bad information. I backed him. I made a mistake by not asking the right question for that agent. It was very technical. I'm speaking a little vaguely on it. It doesn't matter what the agency is. We tried very hard to work with them, but it just didn't work out. And it was a mistake on my part, but they need the right information. Yes, sir.
If selected, based on your research and review of our department, what would you expect to face as your most significant challenges in leading this department, both internally and in the community at large?
Sure. Internally, just from what I've just been able to look and research, I think is recruitment and retention of your officers. I think that's a lot has been, I'm not going to say historically, but over the past few years, it seems like they're always working behind the curve. I know there's several officers left not too long ago for another department locally, and that Madison has too much to offer. The city has too much to offer. The department has too much to offer for us to lose officers, right? So when you look across the country, law enforcement is struggling with recruitment. And that's no different here. But I think there's some things that we can look at, some programs that you could implement, small things to attract officers here more and then retain them after their first, someone's going to leave a job and leave them the first 5 years. And if we really get them past the second year, they should stay. And quite frankly, let's build on culture that starts from the chief. If you build a proper culture, and you provide these officers with what they need, and there's mutual respect, mutual lines of communication, mutual trust, they will stay and they will work hard. I've been around law enforcement my entire life. My entire family is in law enforcement. And I understand what police officers want and what they need. But when I'm telling you about mutual trust and respect and lines of communication, and especially when we're looking at the younger generation of young people nowadays, right? It's the millennials, and now Gen Z is coming up behind them. What's interesting, and study after study will tell you that a benefit package matters, and it does, but culture matters more. And if you have the right culture, you'll retain those people. Really, Madison Police Department should have a line of lateral officers when you're transferred. Look, we don't hire new officers and send them to the academy, right? I think you're in such a place, your city, the history of your city, the forward progress of your city and your department, you shouldn't have to hire a brand new officer that's never been in the academy if you don't want to. You should have a list of people wanting to be here. I mean, I think you can get there. So recruitment and retention is paramount, as from the research I've seen. And for the community, second question, the second part of the question. For the community, again, we'll go back to community engagement. How do we engage our community? How do we increase those engagements? How do we be transparent with the community? And look, some of the things I think we could look at, right? So let's look at our school resource officers. I know they're short staffed now. That can't happen. And I think there's some ways you can leverage those officers inside the schools to break down even more barriers with those young men in the school district, right? One of the things that I've looked at a little bit before, if I was just fortunate to be selected, was the Alabama District Attorneys Association. They use canine dogs in court for traumatized victims. They're not a police patrol dog. They're a yellow Labrador retriever, and they're trained to be a facility dog. So when they interview a victim of a traumatic crime, that dog is there. When those people testify in court, that dog is made available to them, and it is wildly successful. I think you could implement something similar to that with your schools. Again, not a police dog, right? A facility dog. Now you could talk about if you wanted a dog trained to sniff 100 drugs, and it's a Labrador, right? It's all about the breed of type dog you could use, right? So you got to be creative in the ways that you think how we engage the community. That is one of our kids are the most vulnerable and most important. And they're really going to be vulnerable coming out of the pandemic. Being cooped up, being at home. If there's ways that we can add that program, and that's just one simple way, but I think it would pay huge dividends. I know another large department of state has a canine assigned to the high school, and when I'm telling you those kids love that dog, they love that dog. Everybody loves it. Everybody loves an appropriate type dog. And it makes relationships. That is just one way. I think another thing we can do, I don't think you do, is have a citizens police academy. If you have a citizens police academy, I think you immediately implement that, right? Because I go back to when I show people what officers do, people think they know what officers do, but they don't most of If you could establish a citizen police academy, I think it would pay huge dividends within the community. Because then, look, you break down the walls, but you actually show them. So we had it maybe 2,000 to 3,000 times for 6 sessions, and they really see what we did. And as part of that, you provide them opportunities to be in practical situations that these men and women of this department that they do every day. So, okay, so today we're going to plan, you're going to go stop and do a traffic stop, right? It's all like in many academies that have practical situations. You let your citizens go through that. You let them see the difficult choices that immediately have to be made that your officers are faced with. I think that would be a resounding success for the department and the community. I think another thing that we would look at is, I think we would re-engineer our social media engagement with the community, right? People communicate different now than anywhere else and at any time in our history. I know some other departments that are very, very successful in leveraging their social media and their branding, their content, and engaging their community through those avenues, those technical avenues. I think that needs to be looked at, and really, quite frankly, any social media you have, it's all based on the content you provide, right? Content drives your social media, drives people to your website, or your application, or your Twitter account, or your Facebook account. I think you look at that and you make that a robust program in your department. Again, it's just getting information out, right? Press releases, engaging with the media. But there are a lot of positive things the police department do, but we never talk about it. We only talk about what happens when things go bad. And I think that's something that could immediately have some positive effects within the community. Reaching out to those members in the community, establishing relationships with them, the key community stakeholders. But there are just a lot of avenues that we can be more engaged with the city.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us about a time you had to make a controversial decision. How did you weigh your options, and what was the result of that decision?
There's one just pops in mind. There was a large load of narcotics was seized here in Northern Alabama, 30, 40 kilograms of cocaine. And within DEA and all departments, you have different. So in DEA, we have different enforcement groups that work cases as a group and have a supervisor. Well, this particular seizure tied into 2 groups cases, and that doesn't go well. So the seizure was made on the interstate. I think it was 20 to 30 kilograms of cocaine. One group responds. They take the seizure. They're working an investigation. And one of the things you do there is you try to further that investigation. You try to talk. You interview the driver. You try to see where the load of drugs is going. You try to see if there's information there where you can further that. Maybe you take that to Atlanta and you arrest other members of the organization. So they were working that part of the investigation. Well, they start running the phone numbers that this gentleman had in our databases, and it pops up on an active investigation with another group in our office. And you would think that war was about to explode in the office, right? Because it's a large decision. That's successful, and it's tying in with another case that, quite frankly, the other group did not work right. And they just sort of slow roll their investigation. Because when they come to me, like 2 supervisors show up in my office, I'm like, here we go again. Right? This is not cards on. We're all on the same team here. But everybody, look, they want credit to do something good. And I understood that. Well, as I got to looking through the database, right, and do a little checking, I noticed that the one group who was trying to claim this is ours, we need to take it, it's going to mess with our investigation. Well, they hadn't wrote an investigative report in months. They hadn't done surveillance in months. They hadn't done anything in months. And so when I quite directly asked the supervisor, well, let's take a look at the case file and see what you've done. And there's nothing in there. Well, then his head does, right? And you can't defend that. Because if that important investigation, you should have been out there the other day doing surveillance, following folks, running phone records. There's a litany of things that we could do, and they hadn't done anything. Yet they wanted to claim the statistic and the large amount of drugs that was just seized by the work of the other group. So I talked to both supervisors. I didn't admonish the one supervisor in front of the other one. We had a little side conversation, and I told them they're going to work together. And look, at the end of the day, it's about taking a large shipment of drugs out of circulation, which is for the good of our communities, because they were coming here. We found out later they were coming to Alabama, not to Atlanta. They were destined here, and the greater good of serving the community and taking that drug supply away beats any internal quibbling over who's going to get credit for our seizure. So I explained that to both supervisors, and they worked together. Very good. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Agent Morris, in your experience, what is the key to ensuring our police department is compliant with all laws, regulations, and standards in your area of responsibility?
Sure, as the chief of police, obviously, you're responsible, at the end of the day, you're responsible for all actions of the police department. Ensuring that we are following all appropriate law standards, New York police standards, everything, goes back to training for the police department. How are we training our officers? What information are they knowing? What is our annual retraining looking like? Because look, we have to be retrained every year by April to meet those qualifications. Does the training that we choose to send our officers to rise to the level of what we need every year to ensure that we're following the latest standards, the latest laws, of being fully compliant and being in step with national standards? That would fall back to training. There's a variety of ways that we can do that besides annual training. We can put out training bulletins. I'm sure they do. They're training flyers, daily briefings. When they're doing their daily briefings, updated with training laws. In DEA, it's very difficult to make sure that everyone is up to date. Look, it's the federal government. They have a policy for their policies. And when those change, when you have officers and supervisors around the state, you have to get that information out. Communication is key down your chain of command. We have a chain of command in law enforcement and the police department. The supervisor need to be notified. They need to be explained the new procedure or the new law or the new regulation or the new standard, and thus they need to explain to their officers beneath them what is expected of them, and then follow up and ensure that they do it right. We can all know the law and policy, but if we don't follow it, that's where our problems are. And that's how we would make sure everyone's in compliance with what they need.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you share an example of a time you utilized statistics or data to develop a plan of action for positive results?
Yes, ma'am. And I briefly, I should have about when we built the strategy to attack the opioid epidemic in our state. So again, DEA offers have access to stats and things that the general public is not aware of. When we started looking at our overdose stats, I reached out to several medical examiners. I spoke with them. I obtained their stats by county. I spoke with the Alabama District Attorney's Association, the Alabama Attorney General's Office, getting information, partnering with those on that particular problem. When I looked internally at information that was available within DEA, then I start realizing the scope of our problem. And I'll speak in general terms about that. But I looked at multiple databases throughout DEA to one, identify, it's very easy when you see the numbers and numbers of prescriptions, how to identify a potential problem with a DEA registrar. Now you obviously have to investigate those stats. Stats alone can be skewed, but you have to look at behind those stats and the actions behind the statistics. So I gathered information from a wide variety of our internal databases, and it quickly bore out the problem and who needed to be investigated. So those are statistics that I've used. And if I do enjoy statistics, I like to look at numbers, sometimes too much, because again, you can't rely solely on statistics, because as we all know with stats, they can be skewed anyway. You have got to look at the problem or the issue that you're looking at those statistics and holistically take that information. What's happening in actuality on the ground, in your community, in your city, and compare those two. And I've done that on that opioid epidemic and how we were attacking that. Yes, sir.
Can you share a time when your attention to detail had a positive impact on your department?
Yes. In DEA, very similar to your police standards, we have an inspection division and an inspection program. Within that program, you have self-inspections every year required, and then you have headquarters inspections on a 5-year basis, 3 to 5 year basis, where DEA headquarters sends down a team of inspectors to inspect every program in your office. Every program ranging from your financial planning, administrative issues, your case files, your informants, your drug evidence, your non-drug evidence, your firearms, everything you can imagine, just like a police standard, we inspect. When I took over the operations for the state of Alabama, I literally got here in August, and in 1st of November, inspection was showing up to do a headquarters 5-year inspection. Well, when you have offices across the state, and you have every policy, every standard that we have to adhere to, times multiple locations across the state, my attention to detail paid off very well. I'm sometimes too much detail in it. So I had to go and review all of our programs. Well, I learned years ago from the same mentor that told me to lead everyday management when you have to. Some of those are management functions, right? he taught us how to critically look at those standards and our policies and to see if our product is matching with that policy. So then we're not in violation. As I stated earlier, our investigations were about to fall when I got here. Well, either with our administrative program or financial program, our drug and surrounding us. So I found many critical errors. Indeed, you have findings which are critical errors and stuff that's just administrative things that we can fix them on the spot. I found several critical errors in our informant handling program, our financial program, and our non-drug evidence program. And we have a high value seize and recovered programs when we seize large amounts of cash. There are very strict rules in that program that you have to follow. Well, they were not being followed in every office in the state. So I immediately started we do a corrective action of those. We corrected the problem in practice, and I had to document correcting the problem in paper. So between correcting the problems in practice, the problems in paper, in every office across the state of Alabama, which was Huntsville, Birmingham, Mobile, and Montgomery at that time, I was able to avoid findings from headquarters on our inspection. We literally brought 50 inspectors from D.C. down to our state for a week. So that was one way that my attention to detail really saved the state and our division from having significant issues on headquarters inspection. Yes, sir.
All right, well, it comes back to me here at the end. You've run the gauntlet twice. And so, but as we close, I know on behalf of the City Council, we thank you first and foremost for your service, and again, thanking you for your willingness to be our Chief of Police. But I want to give you the last word and talk to these guys for a minute or so and let them know why you feel like you're the best candidate for the Chief of Police position here in the City of Madison.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. And look, you obviously have 4 or 5 candidates to be the Chief of Police first and foremost. I don't know them personally, but just looking at their resumes in the background, you've got a difficult task to choose. I will relate you why I think I could be the best candidate out of those 4 people is, one, if you quickly look at the 4 candidates, I'm the only one that's completely different. The 3 others have a very similar background, very similar experiences. You can take that as a positive or negative. I would take that as a positive. I have experience at the city level of law enforcement, the county level of law enforcement, the state level, and then the federal level of law enforcement. I've conducted law enforcement initiatives and operations and community relations at all 3 of those levels, at the state level, at the national level, and at the local level as well. I think you won't find another candidate that has the budgeting and administrative experience that I have. Look, with all these, we're all subject matter experts in our field, right? We're all subject matter experts in law enforcement. I think if you combine the administrative function I've had, the oversight I've had, the critical incident responses that I've had, the community engagement at a statewide level, I think you will see that I think there's a lot that I could bring to the table to Madison that would be different, that would have a different perspective. I've literally worked across the country. I made Alabama our home for my children, and we've never looked back. But I've been in the largest police departments in the country, and I've been in the smallest police departments in the country. I've seen what is the positives in those departments, but I've also seen the negatives. So I think that brings an asset to you that otherwise you would not have. And I think I could implement that within the department. I think that if I am selected, I think the community will see that I will be a seasoned leader. I will serve humbly. I will be respectful of people's opinions. We will be transparent as absolutely possible. But most importantly, for the men and women in this department, we hire your policemen to protect your communities. You hire your police chief to protect your communities, your city council, your mayor, and most importantly, the men and women in the police department. It is his or her responsibility to ensure their safety, their training, make sure they go home at night. I have been there when agents have not gone home at night. I understand the gravity of situations they face. These are young men and women that we have entrusted a huge responsibility to engage in our community and at the end of the day, protect our community. And I would absolutely protect them. But I think, holistically speaking, there's a lot that I can offer the city has. And I thank you for your time and your opportunity.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Much easier to hear you that way. Well, first and foremost, we again appreciate you coming back up here. We appreciate your willingness to be our chief of police here in the city of Madison, and as importantly, we always appreciate your service.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
You've kind of been through this before. It's very similar to what we did before. We're going to go around with our council twice with questions that give you a great opportunity from an open-ended standpoint, just to give them a good idea of who you are and where you make a difference.
Okay, thank you so much.
We'll start here and hand it off to the Spears, and we'll go from there.
Hello,
Hey, how you doing?
can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Can you please briefly describe your management style and how it will benefit our department and our community?
Well, so my management style is I enjoy a round table type of discussion with all my officers and my supervisors, and I utilize that as the best practices for me because I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I don't tend to be. So I do like to rely on what my other thoughts have and decisions that come from me. They do come from me, and of course, when it becomes a position where I need to immediately make that decision, I do make that decision. I'm autocratic in that way, but I do have a very open discussion with officers on the best practices. If there's a problem or issue that we see that is affecting the city or the citizens, and how's the best way to actually address that issue. And I may not have the best answer. And a perfect example is when we were having thefts from the like package thefts that were occurring on our steps in my jurisdiction in New Orleans. So one of the lieutenants came up and said, why don't we have the officers go there and remove the packages? And that was a discussion we had with all the ranking. That was something we started doing, was actually moving packages, knocking on the doors, trying to get the owner to get the package. And if they weren't there, we'd move the package out of sight. Because one of the reasons we did that was we were having repeat offenders that were quickly getting out of jail and committing the same crimes. Well, what we did by eliminating that resource for them, we actually resolved that problem. And so we had tremendous feedback from the community. Actually, we didn't tell anybody we were doing this, and the news media got a hold of it and actually loved the idea of it and started doing stories about how community engagement, and that was one of the ways we were doing that. And it was a good piece for us, and it was good for officers. It was very uplifting for officers as well.
All right. They made me move the mic over here because I tend to mumble.
I did too, so.
So you can relax with me. We should ask you a quick question. Continuous improvement is what we're going to ask you about right here. And what it is, basically just give us an example of a time that you gave advice to management and it was, improve the product or the organization.
Well, so in 2010, the New Orleans Police Department went under a consent decree. When we went under consent decree, we were not a model police department. And actually, at that time, I was appointed to the position of commander of a district, which is roughly, it's the same thing as running a department it's the same size. So I had 150 officers assigned to me at that point. And it was my suggestions and my thoughts on how to change the persona and the department. And at the time when I took over, we were going through a defunding the police type of atmosphere. And in the next 6 years, we were able to turn that whole image around. Now we're a model police department. The agencies from all over the nation come and look at what we do. One of the things we do well is EPIC, which is ethical policing is courageous. And it's crisis intervention for the officer. And what it does is if you're in a situation and you and I are in a situation and we're handling a combative person who's he's gotten too much for that particular officer to handle, the other officer steps in and says, hold on, John, I got this. Let me step in and I'll take over. It keeps them from doing something. It's crisis intervention for them. And it's a great tool. That's something that I was instrumental in, the crisis intervention team. All of these different programs that we put in place to change the atmosphere of the department, and also change the mindset of the community. In that next few years, we were able to get 3 pay raises in a city that was broke, and that changed. I mean, so that's having the police, having the backing of the community is so important, and it brings so much to the table for the officers and everybody involved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Discuss how a police department utilizes body cameras and the circumstances and timing of when body cam footage should be released or shown to those outside the police department.
Well, body-worn camera footage is a great tool to use in the community. It is transparency. You're able to show good interaction with the police. You're also able to show whenever if something does. So if something does happen and it's a negative, something negative that the officer does or something, you need to get ahead of that, and you need to be forthcoming with information. You don't need to dilly-dally about releasing information, and when you do it sends a message of deception. And I think it's very important that you get in front of that and you give out what you can and what you're able to give out. And there's incidents where you're not able to release body camera footage. And for instance, Officer Marcus McNeil, he was killed in line of duty in the 7th District. And during that incident, we didn't release the body-worn camera footage. And we did release body-worn camera footage from another officer. They didn't show the incident, but it showed up to the incident. I think it's important that each circumstance requires different tactics and different times when you do release and when you don't.
So budgets are always tight. Can you give an example of how you stretch your budget for your optimal success?
So I've been over a mountain unit for a significant amount of time. And the mountain unit, which is utilized year-round and mostly throughout the department. And one of the things we ran into was buying horses, buying equipment, and things of that nature. And when you go to a point where you don't have the money for it, there's things that you need that you can do to create those funds. And we were able to create a community board, which included a mounted cops organization. And basically, I'd like to do something like that here. It includes the community into it, like a Madison cops, and it supports those officers. And education and training is that's the biggest thing you can have. So you have the mounted cops, I was able to start having fundraisers through a 501c that citizens run. And they were actually able to use that money that was generated to buy equipment that we needed, buy different horses. We were able to do that, different things like that. And we actually turned out making a profit with the organization and not require any funds from the city to do that. And that's a huge plus for us.
Thank you.
Commander Walls,
Yes, ma'am.
can you describe a time when you were able to identify a complex problem, evaluate the options, and implement a solution?
Just recently. So we have an ongoing problem with our juvenile repeat offenders, and they're breaking into cars. And one of the things that we established was an early warning system for our juveniles. It's not necessarily the same thing as what Madison has in place for their officers. They have an early warning system, but it's similar. So we identified the individuals who are possibly juveniles that are repeat offenders who you see as a problem. And so what we did was myself and my direct lieutenant went to the parents of those juveniles. We identified them, they're all over the city. We would go there personally and bring resources to those parents and try to get those kids going in the right direction. Because a lot of times you see that where they've just shifted and going in the wrong direction. And this is an opportunity for us to go in there and actually try to correct that behavior and get them into different programs. We have different social programs that are available. And that has made a difference in several of those kids' lives. Some of them were not able to, and in some of the cases we have parents that are reluctant, and that's where we've actually came in and charged the parents for failure to supervise. And that's some of the things we have to do, but we take that into account. It's not, it's not automatic, but we do look at the whole situation, try to help them. We go to those parents and say, we're not here right now. He hasn't done anything right now, or she hasn't done anything right now. We're here as a friend and trying to get you the help you need to get your child on the right path.
Please describe a time when you dealt calmly and effectively with a high-stress situation.
There's been so many. This is stressful right now. Well, first one that comes to thought is when I first came on the police department. I was right out branding out a recruit and on the 12-hour shifts. And as soon as I get out, we go on a call. We pull over a car that was obviously they had narcotics in the car. They were smoking narcotics and pulled the car. I was in the training officer with a training officer at the time. And as soon as we get out, another car pulls up and starts shooting at us. And so that was very stressful. And then keeping you calm and then actually finding out later that it was all a distraction to get us away from the other car and to find out that there was, a large amount of drugs in that vehicle. Keeping calm to go and address the vehicle that was shooting us, as well as maintaining control of that other vehicle. And a large amount of weed, narcotics, and I keep on do signal codes. I'm sorry. The large amount of marijuana that was in the vehicle, it was like 5 pounds, I think, or something. So that was that was a tool that, that was one particular stressful situation that immediately comes to mind. And for that, I guess it's because it was early in my career too, but there's been so many different stressful events that, talking to the public, actually giving interviews whenever you have, I think that's probably the next thing I would say would probably be the stressful is having to go on and talk about the death of a loved one, someone's loved one, or something of that nature, and talk about it onto the media about it. I had a family that was murdered, and actually had to talk about that. And that was very stressful, especially seeing the deceased child, children involved in it. So those type of things.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. This is dealing with strategic planning and vision. So describe your experience developing, implementing, and modifying a strategic plan or a similar plan document.
Well, we had, we've had several major events in New Orleans, and I'm on the ground from the beginning to the end with those plans, from the Super Bowl to National Championship games to French Quarter Festival to Jazz Fest to all these different functions that come in. Like just this week, we had the president coming in town to visit our pumping station. It's actually in the second station. Well, I was going to leave on Wednesday, and unfortunately I wasn't able to because the president was coming in town, so I had to make adjustments. And it was kind of dropped on us, and so you immediately have to adjust and figure out a game plan, work with Secret Service and different agencies on deployment of officers and utilizing how you can strategically protect that perimeter and different things. So that's one. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, over to you, Connie.
Sorry.
Welcome to the snack.
There are plenty of officers here to do that. Regarding compassionate policing, community policing, and citizen protections, how do all of these look under you as police chief for the city of Madison?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand the first part.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Regarding compassionate policing, community policing, and citizen protections, how do all of those look under you as the chief of police for the city of Madison?
Well, like I said, you can't do anything without the citizens backing you, and it's very important to have the community on your side. And learning that from Mardi Gras, my first Mardi Gras, you're in a crowd of 400 in one block, and you're one officer, And if you don't have that, community involvement and engagement, and you have to have them on your side. And without it, you lose, and you'll lose big time if something happens in that block. So that's something I learned early on in my career. And with Madison, I see that one of the things I'd like to do would be to the PCAP, or Madison Community Advisory Board. I think that's a fabulous idea and a fabulous tool. We utilize that in New Orleans. I use that in my program, and it's Police Community Advisory Board. It's the same basis, and what I do is it gives us an opportunity to interact with the community. It gives us an opportunity to answer and respond to their concerns, and most of the time, and what we find out is that a lot of it is just misinformation that they're receiving, the public's receiving, and they just need to understand why we do the things we do. That is a great tool. I utilize Facebook. We do a weekly crime meeting, which I put out live stream on Facebook, and we open it up to the public, and that gives the public an opportunity to ask questions and interact with us. And I would like to do a meet and greet right off the bat to get to meet with the public, and maybe at one of the schools in a gymnasium or something, and have that interaction with the public, just to have that, so they would get to know who I am, a little bit about me, and know where their concerns are, and see what they have problems with, their issues. And one of the things we do is a hot sheet, which I call a hot sheet, but it's what the hot topics that they have or see. We hand it out and then get it back, and then I can have another meeting, a monthly meeting, and just address those concerns. I think that's a tremendous tool in engaging the public that way. And another thing would be something that I started in my district, is a youth advisory board, basically. And what you do is our school resource officer identifies, it's been class officers, but in the different schools, and we meet with those representatives of the school and talk about what they see are issues in the current climate of today, and how we can address their fears, and give them an understanding of what we do. We meet with them, and then we have we'll have a big congregation of all the students with all the students available in the large gymnasium at the school. We'll have a meeting, and they'll have a board, and that board will be the school involving the student council members, and they'll actually ask questions of me that we talked about, and we'll discuss in front of the school. And it kind of opens up that dialect, and also it's a good tool for us to hiring. There's so many kids that we've reached out to, and get them into the hiring process that way. Another thing we'd be doing, like youth ride along. I saw the bikes. They all have bikes. That'd be a great tool to have bicycle patrols and interacting in the public that way. I know there's some training issues with that, but that's where I think that having that Madison Cops program would be able to fund training that you don't necessarily have in your budget, but be able to utilize that to fund training for outside training, such as EPIC, ICAP, which is something that is taught at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which I'm familiar with. I always look at best practices, and the ICAP, it marries up with the CIT training, which is a good tool whenever you see somebody in crisis. It gives them the officer the knowledge to know that this person's actually, they're having some kind of episode, and what they need to do to address it, and how they can address it, and take the higher road. Sorry, I'm rambling on. Do that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Well, the next question is just something that I don't really like to talk about with my wife too much, because she says I make them, but it's about mistakes. Like, I believe. So, can you give us an example of a mistake that you made as an active leader, and what caused you to make that mistake, and how you rectified it?
I'll give you a good example of that. As a young supervisor, I was put over the homicide unit in Central City, and I took in veteran officers, and for the most part, I took what they said at face value, and I have a good friend who worked for me for years in the homicide division, and his nickname is Rooster. And so there was a particular incident where we're handling a situation, and it turned out that he got into it with a supervisor on the scene, one of the rank that was on the scene. I was on we had multiple shootings, and we had people at different locations, and also it was a homicide involving multiple offenders. So the scene was chaotic and spread out. Well, he got into it with a supervisor on the scene about impounding a vehicle. And, well, I took what he said at face value and went off on the supervisor instead of finding out the facts first. And I learned from that very quickly that was the wrong thing to do. I ended up having to eat a lot of crow and go out and apologize to that in that situation without having the facts and knowing what really happened. And it wasn't after I had my temper tantrum, the other detective came to me and said, Rooster was wrong. And and then it came out what all happened, and I had to go and apologize and address that. That's one of the times.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If selected, based on your research and review of our department, what would you expect to face as your most significant challenges in leading this department, both internally and in the community at large?
I think the biggest thing would be to the same thing as that I have to deal with now in New Orleans. It would be involving the community and policing in this time and era, and making the adjustments. You have to use what's best practices. I utilize IACP and the different tools that offer different best practices that come up from that. And they don't use, and I look outside, not just I don't look just inside of the nation. I also look outside of the nation and see what they have. England has a unique way of being able to disarm armed individuals with knives, and you don't see that, so that's where ICAT comes into play, and that's something that I think needs to be trained through. Not every incident you're able to. Not every incident is you're able to actually deal with an individual with arm and a knife that doesn't end in deadly force, but they have a significant way of, they have a great way of handling those type of situations that you have to be able to look outside, think outside the box, I guess, and more or less look outside, just in your department, look at what's the best practices nationwide as well as worldwide. And I think that the community buy-in is what's important, and having that, and I think that's the biggest obstacle that I would face would be the community buy-in, and just that's all I can really see as the hardships for Madison.
Can you tell us about a time you had to make a controversial decision? How did you weigh your options, and what was the result?
Well, I have one of the times actually recently was involving a juvenile repeat offender and his mother. His mother is taking actions where she has not been willing to work with us, and actually tries to be more of his friend. And in that case, I actually went and charged the mother for failure to supervise, which was very controversial in the department or in the city at the time. But once the facts came out, it was very supported by the whole city, and now we actually are doing that on a regular basis whenever we have that kind of problem. Another incident was 2 weeks ago. We had a vehicle stolen that was actually an EMS vehicle that was stolen from the hospital by a schizophrenic patient, and he ran into several cars and ran into one of our police cars when we were trying to stop him before he hurt somebody. And we, instead of charging him, we actually brought him to a mental health facility to get the mental health he needed. Well, it was very controversial at first, and then once it came out that we had performed 3 other crisis intervention. We had forms that we fill out every time we have a crisis intervention. And we had 3 different incidents where we handled this individual, and we showed that in community, and really loved that we didn't take him to jail. We didn't charge him, and we left it up to the district attorney's office if they decided they wanted to, but I don't, there's nobody for that. So, just you're welcome.
Commander Wills, in your experience, what is the key to ensuring our police department is compliant with all laws, regulations, and standards in your area of responsibility?
Education and training, without a doubt, that's the key. Education and training. There's so many times that you see incidents involving officers where something's gone wrong, and it's all comes down to education and training. That's why when people say defund the police, I don't think that's the ideal thing. What you need to do is fund the training and education on that part of it. That will eliminate the problems that you have. Not knowing how to deal with a situation is what gets people in trouble.
Thank you.
Can you share an example of a time you utilized statistics and data to develop a plan of action for positive results?
So about 6 months ago, we had an increase in violence in our Pigeontown, Holly Grove area, and you could clearly see that from the uptick in violence that was occurring in these areas, and we knew that it was, and you could tell by the data that was presented that we were having issues with violence in particular that was stemming from a particular business, and that so from that statistics we were able to focus on that business and actually able to shut that business down, and from that it dried up the issues we were having there, and also we utilized that and increased the numbers of visible patrols in those areas, and that also eliminated that issue that we were having. We were working jointly with our federal partners, ATF, and some of the other agencies, and the FBI, and we were able to actually put a lot of those repeat offenders that we were having problems with in jail on a longer basis. And they were looking at gun charges and different things that we were able to identify, and from the data that we were able to form.
Thank you, man. So attention to detail. Share a time when your attention to detail had a positive impact on your department.
I think that the Super Bowl would probably be the biggest thing with the attention to details, because you have to look at every block and every intersection and every aspect of what's going on at a particular time and where that traffic and pedestrian flow will be going, and knowing what times teams will be moving. And one of the things with being in charge of the French Quarter during that time period was anything that could go on happened, which was considered the French Quarter, the 8th District. Everything's in that area, which would be the Superdome, the Convention Center, all of the major places that would facilitate different events. So you have to pay particular attention. And during that time period, we had an increased number of outside agencies that came in to support us. So I had 500 officers assigned to me at that point, and making sure that every officer's name and every location and where they're going to be at a particular time was very important. It paid big dividends for us. And the same thing with the national championship, which I thought was more difficult than the Super Bowl because of just the numbers that it brought in. You had the first time in 75 years, you had 2 teams fighting for a national championship on one team's home turf, and that was a huge undertaking there. And managing that right in the middle of Mardi Gras too, so everything happens in quarter 2 during Mardi Gras. So that having a strategic plan in place to make sure that every officer is where they need to be at the particular time, and then managing that and making sure that the supervisors are making sure that they're where they're supposed to be is another thing, and that's part of it. So, thank you.
Well,
All right, you made it around twice, and I think in this case, as we kind of close, thank you again for your willingness to be our chief of police and also for your service. But I'm going to give the last words to you, and as you address council, maybe take a minute, give them an idea why you feel like you're the best candidate for the chief of police position in the city of Madison.
Well, I've got 25 years experience with New Orleans, and I've every time I think I've done it or did anything, something new happens. God humbles me, and something new it does occur. I do utilize what I think that Madison wants in a chief. I do have that. Community is a big part of what I do, and I brought a department. I was instrumental in bringing a department to a model department. We have programs in place like EPIC and our crisis intervention team, which is nationally departments from all over the United States come and train to see how we do our ethical policing, and that shows a lot about us and how far we've gone in the 10 years and what we are as a model. And I think in this new age and the way the city is growing, it's very important that you stay on top of that and you stay ahead of the game. And Madison's growing very rapidly, and I think it's important that you stay in touch with the community and know the community. And I think that would make me the best candidate for this position.
We certainly thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you.
And it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it here, and thank y'all for having me.
Thank you.
Well, welcome. Good to have you here again. You're batting cleanup here this time, so. First and foremost, we thank you for your willingness to be the chief of police here in the city of Madison, as we've talked about earlier. Thank you so much for your service. Council's here, and again, as we did before, we'll go around twice with questions that are open-ended, giving you a chance to answer them in any way you want to. And then I'll kind of close it up at the end. If that works for you.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'm going to roll the microphone over this way.
Good morning.
morning, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Can you please briefly describe your management style and how it will benefit our department and our community?
So my management style is a collaborative style. I like to work with others. I like to partner with others. I learned early on in some mentorship opportunities I've had with some very good people that guided me along my career that nothing is more important than establishing good partnership. I know that I'm not always going to have the answers, and the more people that I can bring along to help me with those answers to solve problems, the better, and looking for the right partners. So it's collaborative, but in a police organization, it also has to be situational. And there are times where I have to be more autocratic. If it's an emergency situation and I'm the commander on the scene, there's not really time to be that collaborative. Again, I practice situational leadership styles, but in most cases, it's a collaborative style.
Thank you.
Right. So my question is about continuous improvement. Can you give us an example of a time when your advice to management led to an improvement of a process or a team or something like that?
Yes, sir. I can give you one very recently. So I'm a former CALIA manager for our organization. And I noticed that one of the things that was consistent on all of our previous career assessments was the fact that we have a very strong organization as far as training, as far as great equipment for our officers, great supervision. But where we were lacking was technology. We were behind the times of, even though we are in Virginia Beach, the richest city in the Hampton Roads area, for some reason we lagged the technology behind all of the cities surrounding us. One of the things that I had proposed to our previous chief was that the way we assess technology was kind of spotty in our organization. It was essentially an officer would see a good idea on YouTube or read an article somewhere and say, hey, we need to get that. And the officer was usually the one that would have to contact that organization and find out more about that, contact the vendors for that particular property, trying to set something up for the vendors to come out and spec it for our particular organization. And it was a very inefficient process. And as our city continued to grow in Virginia Beach, we had a lot of ambitious programs with technology. And part of it was putting strategic cameras in strategic locations throughout the city, our oceanfront area, for instance. We had a vending area called Town Center that's very similar to Town Madison. And we were looking at having banks of cameras to be monitored 24 hours a day. But again, there was no central location, there was no central hub, there was no central unit that was responsible for bringing on this new technology. And I proposed to the chief that we need a specific technology and research unit. And it would be headed by a captain. We have a lot of young captains on the department who are very good with technology, computers, camera systems, and all that. I'm not. I'm an older guy. Proposed that one of these captains would be the one to lead it. And then we would take our analysis unit, we would take our crime analysis unit, our planning analysis unit, our info tech people, and put them all under the same hub. And that technology unit would be responsible for researching the new technology, testing it for our particular purposes, and having it housed under one particular command. We've just recently done that. We do have a separate command for that now. That command is now allowing us to bring on a new RMS system, records management system. That command is also seeing to it that every officer from the chief on down now will be carrying body cameras. So there's a new body camera rolled out with the latest equipment for that body camera. They were responsible for, we had an incident in Virginia Beach that was kind of controversial. We had a recent officer-involved shooting where the officer did not activate his body camera prior to it happening. And the question was asked, well, there's technology out there about drawing the weapon from your holster and the camera automatically coming on. Well, we had just gone to brand new holsters that wasn't compatible with the previous equipment that we purchased. And now this particular unit is in charge of finding the right holster with the right equipment and all that. So it makes it much more efficient to bring in that technology that we're using.
I'm going to continue along the lines of body cameras with my question. Discuss how a police department utilizes body cameras and the circumstances and timing of when body cam footage should be released or shown to those outside the police department.
That is a good question. Body cameras should be utilized for their intended purpose. The intended purpose is to document citizen encounters, to document evidence of scene, and if used properly, they become an invaluable tool not only to stave off what they were originally designed for, that complaint against officer conduct, and become actually a useful tool in evidence gathering and documentation. So body cameras should be used properly prior to an officer actually getting to the scene. And again, this is the incident that I just told you about, the controversial police shooting, caused us to go back and look at our current camera system. Our current camera system is set up that when the officer activates the camera actually resets 30 seconds prior to that activation, but there's no sound to it. We've now decided to go back to a full 2 minutes, which is the full amount of time that system allows us to do so. So the camera should be activated when the officer is called to a call for service, prior to the officer getting out of the car with a self-initiated investigation or traffic stop. It should be activated as the officer is walking up to that house where they're going to have that encounter. And again, getting the right equipment with that technology that allows us to actually back up should the officer forget to turn that camera on immediately. It at least allows us to go 2 minutes prior to the officer walking up there and capturing what may happen prior to the officer's contact.
Okay, and then the second part of the question about when should footage be released or shown to those outside the police department?
So that can be tricky because if I talked about how the body camera footage can be used to also document evidence. One of the things that we're training our officers to do is as they walk into a crime scene to begin narrating what they're seeing. Turn the camera towards the evidence, towards a potential victim or something like that, and document what's going on. There may be some controversies that come up at a particular crime scene, and there are times where that body camera footage cannot be immediately released because it may end up interfering with the actual prosecution of that case. We can't release footage of a victim's face. A victim of a crime, especially something involved with sexual assault or something very, very intimate like that. We don't want to record a medical process or a medical procedure. So those are times that we don't have them on. Now, as to when we actually release it, once we've been able to evaluate that for potential harm in a case that's going to be prosecuted, and there's an agreement between the police department and the prosecutor as to when to release that, especially in a controversial case, then and only then should it be released to the public. If it's a case involving a possible death where that might have been officer involved, that is also a tricky situation. I can give you an example of an incident that we had in Virginia Beach where we didn't have body cameras at the particular time that it happened, but I discussed with the chief, who I was his executive aide at the time, when to release some critical information on a case that was an officer-involved shooting that was not going to go to criminal court because both the people involved had been killed. However, it may have affected us in a future litigation type of case. And it was sensitive enough to where we had to release the information we had right away, regardless of whether or not it was going to cost us down the road in that future litigation, just in the interest of our standing in the community, what people thought about the police department, and the fact that we were wrong. We had to admit we were wrong right up front, and we did. And actually, it turned out well when it did go to eventual case in court, in that we didn't pay out as much as we thought we were going to, because again, we had laid out all the facts earlier.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. As you know, budgets are always tight. Can you give an example of how you stretch your budget for optimal success?
Yes, so one of the previous assignments I had was that of a walking beach supervisor in our oceanfront area in Virginia Beach. This is an area that's key to us because one of the big drivers of our economy there is the tourism economy. And I was working as a day shift supervisor, and I noticed that our officers were tied up quite a bit in our oceanfront area on calls such as lost children, lost property, some traffic-related issues and all of that, and they weren't really available for more of the criminal justice-related things than we actually would have in an incident that took place at the oceanfront, disorderly people and stuff like that. So we were tying up our officers inordinately on these types of cases that really didn't require a sworn officer. So what I did is I proposed at that time a kind of a student liaison, using college students as interns and liaisons, where they came out as kind of a quote friendship patrol. They had T-shirts, they had hats that identified them as who they were. They came out and they worked either as volunteers or as paid in a part-time capacity, much less than what a sworn officer would. And they were able to handle these types of cases and free up officers for more important issues. So, thank you.
Captain Gandy, can you describe a time when you were able to identify a complex problem, evaluate the options, and implement a solution?
Yes, well, one of them is what I just talked about with the technology issue. Another issue we had that I'm dealing with right now in my precinct, precinct commander, is I have a community that is divided amongst itself. It's a community that a lot of people live near the oceanfront. They have nice houses. They work very hard to get where they are. They enjoy the quality of life they have in that particular community. And our city, within the last couple of years, allowed for the short-term rentals. And a lot of the property in this particular neighborhood are owned by real estate agencies that use them as short-term rentals. And so that affected the quality of life within the community. Half the community was for this, half the community was against it. So the civic league in that community actually split in two. And they contact me constantly about the issues, and they have competing interest in their issues. And I kind of act as a referee between these two groups. And essentially, I have to tell them both that I have to keep a neutral stance. I can't take one side or the other. My particular reason for being as a precinct commander is the interest of public safety and ensuring that quality of life. And I've been able to thread that needle to meet the interest of both sides.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Please describe a time when you dealt calmly and effectively with a high-stress situation.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm actually one of the officers that brought in a crisis intervention team program to our city. Time I was the supervisor of the warrant fugitive unit. We were responsible for picking up people on civil mental warrants, picking up people, who were going through crisis and things like that. Our officers had absolutely no training in how to deal with somebody who was mentally ill or suffering a mental health crisis. I got with our mental health professionals and was able to get them some of the same training that the social workers did. And we were able to form our first CIT program. And since we've done that, we've actually become the biggest CIT program in the state of Virginia. So using the lessons that I learned from that particular program, I was nearby when called out one night for a young Marine who had recently returned from multiple deployments, to Afghanistan and Iraq. And he came back, found out that he had been assessed by his commanders that he had some mental issues and they were not going to redeploy him, even though he had just recently trained up a group of young Marines that were getting ready to go into combat for the first time. And as he was supposed to get on the plane with them, they told him, not you. You're not ready, you can't do this anymore. And it really hurt him. So he went AWOL from the Marines, went to his grandfather's house where he immediately locked himself in the garage with all types of weapons and was threatening to kill himself. And I remember going through the door and his grandfather telling me point blank, you're going to have to kill him. He was that committed to doing that. I was able to use those CIT skills that I learned. I was able to build a rapport with him through my past involvement in the military myself as a veteran. I was a lieutenant at the time, so I had bars on the collar, and he was able to relate to me as a lieutenant in the military. He called me LT. I was able to actually build that rapport with him on that military level. I was able to actually sit down next to him and talk him out, and got him to voluntarily go with me to a nearby veterans hospital that deals with me.
Warren, thanks for being here. So dealing with strategic planning and vision is the background on this. Can you describe your experience developing, implementing, or modifying a strategic plan or similar document?
Yes, sir. So one of my previous assignments when I became captain was that of brigade command duty officer, which is kind of an executive officer position. And one of the responsibilities I have is developing that strategic plan. And I wrote the executive summary for the strategic plan for our current strategic plan that we're following in Virginia Beach, and then helped develop a list of goals and objectives for us to meet during that particular strategic plan. And it's our 3 to 5 year plan. So, and just looking at you guys here in Madison have a very ambitious planning program. I did look at that and look at a lot of the areas that you have. And again, offline, I can get with you about some plans that we have for that.
Okay. Thanks, sir.
I've been here. Okay, regarding compassionate policing, community policing, and citizen protections, how do all of those look under you as chief of police for the city of Madison?
Well, everything begins and ends with that compassion and empathy. I believe that if police officers use more compassion and empathy and understanding, we probably wouldn't have half the controversial issues that do arise. In saying that, I do believe that 99% of the time that's exactly what officers do. We don't hear about that bad 1%. So the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes helps you be able to formulate a plan to help them with any type of problem-solving issues that we have. That is a key component of crisis intervention training, by the way, is building that empathy and trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand where they're coming from, what they're thinking. If they're not thinking clearly, then allow that clear thought for them. So as far as I'm concerned, sanctity of life is first and foremost for anything that the police department does. One of the things that we implemented in Virginia Beach, and I would like to see replicated here should I become chief of police, is put every officer through the initial phase of crisis intervention training. That's not to make all of them a CRT officer. The key component of that is to have that basically self-select, so we have the right people in that particular role. But that initial training allows officers to learn that crisis communication that's needed most. And for every officer to learn that crisis communication would help them, again, become more empathetic, sympathetic, and compassionate towards others.
Thank you.
All right, so this is my second and last question, so you won't have to look at me more than one. My question is along the lines of something that I try not to do, but do pretty often. It's about mistakes. We all make mistakes. Can you give us an example of a time you made a mistake, and what the mistake was and how you rectified it?
Yes, sir. So I was a field training officer. I don't know why when you said that it just popped into my mind, but when I was a field training officer, I had trained my first trainee, and we became very close as friends. When he was cut loose on his own, we were working together about a week later after I cut him loose, and he received certification as an officer. And we went to a particular call where there were two guys. It was an assist rescue call that two guys were either passed out, had some kind of medical issue, or were sleeping in their vehicle. We responded to that particular scene. Went out and noticed that these guys, sure enough, were sleeping in the vehicle. We could see that they were breathing because their chests were rising up and down. We knocked on the windows several times. We made a lot of noise. We felt that they may be faking this one, whatever it is. One of them had their window cracked down about that far. And at that particular time, not all of us had portable radios. So I went back to my car to get on the mobile radio to call for rescue to come up and check them out. And the fire department, in case we had to force anything into the car, in case it wasn't a medical issue. And as I'm walking back, this particular officer says, well, how about if I just spray a little pepper spray? That'll wake him up. I said, yeah, that would be fun. Not thinking he was going to actually do it as I'm walking back to the car, and he did it. And they both came out of the car coughing and everything like that. And they were pretending to be asleep when they were out there. They admitted that to us. But now we have a serious use of force that didn't need to happen. And had I not been more forceful in saying, don't do something like that, that young officer would not have done it. And as a result, he got a pretty hefty suspension. He almost lost his job over it. I took full responsibility for it by saying that it was my fault. I should have supervised him better. I was a senior officer on scene. I didn't do that. I learned a valuable lesson. I look back on that and think about how words have consequences. And that's the lesson I learned.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
If selected, based on your research and review of our department, what would you expect to face as your most significant challenges in leading this department, both internally and in the community at large?
Yes, ma'am. I think this department, like every other department right now, is struggling with having enough personnel to be able to do the job. I discussed in my earlier interview with the mayor and others that one of the first things I would do is look at ways to improve recruiting for the police department. One of the things we've done in Virginia Beach has been really successful for us lately is utilizing something known as the Skills Bridge program with the military. You have a heavy military presence here, just like we do. This allows us to actually get in with the military. You have to sign up for the program, get in with the military for officers, or not officers, but military members who are getting ready to separate from the military about a year to 6 months out. And we begin to look for those military members who are looking for a specific type of job to get into. So if it is public safety, we go to job fairs that the military holds. We find they actually connect us with potential members of the military who are getting ready to separate, who are looking for a job, so that we can begin mentoring them and getting them into the hiring process. That would be something I'd like to see replicated here. looking for ways to possibly use funds that we otherwise spend to send an officer to the police academy down in Selma or Birmingham or somewhere else, and using that as possible hiring bonuses to bring in people who are already certified, so we don't have to wait for them to come from a police academy. Looking at ways where we can begin making contact with high school kids that may be interested in a law enforcement career, and bring them out during the summer and have them help us out with things like special events, things like with the street fair that we have here, 4th of July operations and things like that, where they can help out with traffic direction control. We provide a training course, handling stranded motorists, things like that, that free up our officers to be able to do more law enforcement related types of jobs. And then they become more interested in that particular career because they're actually experiencing what it is, and then when they become old enough, we send them to the police academy. And we're hiring them locally, so they will stay local. The good thing about hiring military is that you're getting a very experienced, self-disciplined type of person. The bad thing about hiring somebody who's not from your area is if their life situation changes, such as their wife having a child or something, and they don't have a family support unit here, they're going to leave to where they will have a family support unit. So it's important to find people who are from the local community to become members of the department. But I think that the biggest issue right now is getting enough officers to do the job. The other issues are tackling the myriad of issues that we find in a community like this that is growing, is finding ways to do differential patrol. You have the town Madison corridor that just screens for a police substation with officers on bicycles and things like that. But in order to be able to do that, we have to have enough officers to be able to meet all of those service demands.
Tell us a little bit about the last time you had to make a controversial decision. How did you weigh all your options, and what was the result?
Well, I recently had to deal with a young officer who was an otherwise great officer, but was making the same mistake over and over again. He liked to drive our police cars a little too fast. And I know that the two biggest liabilities on the police department are driving issues and use of force. I had to tackle this one head on, so I dealt with him pretty strongly on his first disciplinary type of issue. Not to get into what I did, but hoping to get his attention. This was an officer who was well liked by his fellow officers who otherwise did a really good job, but continued to commit the same types of issues to the point where I had progressive discipline in them. And then finally, I guess we both mutually agreed that he just didn't need to do this job anymore because he wasn't learning it. And it was tough losing a well-trained officer who otherwise did a good job, who was very popular, but it was a choice I had to make. Do we allow him to continue doing these things, creating some serious liability for the city, or do we just agree that maybe he needs to find another line of work? Thank you.
Captain Gandy, in your experience, what is the key to ensuring our police department is compliant with all laws, regulations, and standards in your areas of responsibility?
A big part of that you already have, and that's being a CLIA certified organization. I know CLIA can be expensive. It can be, sometimes it can be a little troublesome in trying to comply with the different standards that they have. But that type of accreditation allows you to be a professionalized agency. And the more professional you are in meeting those best standards out there in the industry, allows you to avoid some of those types of issues. Mm-hmm. So CLIA is a big one. The other thing is to always learn from others' mistakes. I am constantly reading case law. I'm constantly reading about controversial issues around the country, and I look at that with the viewpoint of what if that was here? How could we prevent that? What is it that we're not doing now that we could be doing to prevent that? So a lot of that is to provide officers with realistic training, to bring that stress level up, put them in that stressful situation in a training environment rather than have it happen to them in real life and then seeing how they actually perform. So training, the standards, the policies, but there's one thing that I did not mention, I wanted to hold out for last, is supervision. My supervisory, when I'm looking at supervisors, my strongest connection is with the sergeant. That sergeants are where the rubber meets the road with our officers. We can have the best policies in the world, we can have the best training standards, we can have a great vision and mission statement and value statement, but it's the sergeant that ensures what that culture is in the organization. And if the sergeant is not ensuring a good culture, culture will eat policy and training for lunch every day. So ensuring that we have the right people in the right positions, that those supervisors are doing their job, they are closely supervising and monitoring people, using corrective action, holding people accountable, and not making excuses for them. So it's a combination of CALEA, the standards, the training, but most importantly, the supervision.
Thank you. Can you share an example of a time you utilized statistics or data to develop a plan of action for positive results?
We do that constantly, we are very, and this is something that I would like to see here too, we're very data-driven and evidence-based in everything we do. It's important to have realistic, real-time information that provides you with the crime trends in a particular area, traffic safety trends in a particular area. If you have good data, then you can come up with a good plan to attack that. One of the issues we've had recently here is a crime trend that we had with a group of burglars that were breaking out windows and breaking into shops that sell the vaping equipment. And we were able to look at the crime trends, patterns, the days that they were happening, time of day, daily, develop a plan of control around that. And a few nights ago, we were able to arrest the group that was doing that. Another example of using statistics is, again, going back to when I was a CALEA manager. The CALEA manager is responsible for doing annual reports. The annual report is supposed to be an analysis of how the department is doing things. We looked at, for instance, use of force. I believe the policy here is called resistance to force, or resistance to action or something like that. But it's all the same thing. Use of the force are one of the areas where police departments are most under the microscope. And we were able to use our analysis in our city to provide quarterly presentations to the city council about how the police department is doing. One of those is an examination of use of force. How many contacts we have, how many arrests we make, how many tickets we write, how many enforcement encounters we have, and then bear that down on how many times we actually have to use force, which is actually an infinitesimal number. And we were able to then further drill down to those statistics to break it down by demographics. On the surface, the demographics look like we use force against minorities much more often than we did against anybody else. When we broke it down by population, and we looked at where people that we were arresting and having contacts were coming from, we found that they were coming from cities that were either 50-50 in minority population or majority minority populations, and found that they were coming to our city when they were committing those crimes, we had those encounters. We found that when we actually provided those statistics that matched the national standard against an adjustment factor, we found that we were actually using force against minorities much lower than the national rate.
All right, so attention to detail. And obviously, as we've heard, there's many negative aspects, right, to policing. But share a time where your attention to detail actually had a positive impact on your department.
Good question. I think I used the example earlier when I was the supervisor of the warrant fugitive unit. The attention to detail, looking at going back to use of force and how we were handling cases involving people who are mentally ill and mental actually went back, and this is a while ago, we had the old reams of computer paper that came out on the dot matrix kind of stuff, and actually used paper and pencil to figure out how often we went to cases involving people who were in mental health crisis or were mentally ill, and how many times we used force, how many times we ended that encounter in an enforcement-based issue where we actually found something to arrest them for rather than get them to the treatment that they needed. And was able to find out that our force was limited. We were doing a good job there, but we were overrepresented in finding the easy way out, and that was finding someone to arrest someone for who was suffering a mental health crisis or mentally ill, and found out that we could actually do better. And that resulted in policy language that at the very beginning of the policy, that our objective is to get people who are in those conditions the help that they need, rather than making them out of worse, like putting them in jail or somebody else has to do it.
All right, well, it comes back to me, and we thank you again, for your time and your willingness to be our chief of police and your service. But as we close, I'm going to give you the last word, and if you had a minute or two to tell council why you feel like you're the best candidate for the chief of police in the city of Madison when next time.
Well, I just brought up that I love this city. I drove around it last night, and the more I drove around it, the more I saw it, the more of it I love. I think this is a great place for me and my family to live. In saying that, if I was going to live here and be the chief of police here, I would want this to be the best agency that it could be. I know that Madison enjoys the reputation of having some of the finest school districts, not only in the state, but in the country. I'd like the police department that would match that particular standard. You have, there are two areas where a business is looking to move to come to an area. The two areas they're going to look at is how good the schools are and how safe the community is. You already have one problem. I want that other problem to be just as strong so that businesses would couldn't wait to get here. So some of the ideas I had in looking at that and being the best person, one of the things that I do is I like to analyze things. And one of the things I did to prepare for this particular interview and coming here was not so much looking at your crime statistics in your police department, but I spent a lot of time in your planning page to see where you guys are going. And some of the things I looked at was the fact that looking at the demographics of the community. The community is changing, it's becoming much more diverse. Some of the things that I was considering, and I know there was an incident that happened several years ago, the idea of bringing in some kind of cross-cultural communications. I have an article here that I read, it's very interesting, and it was about kids that don't speak English, or don't speak English very well. Summer camp set up for the English. Kids aren't speaking the language, or about parents. And the idea that the parents are probably not speaking that language very well, those types of communities will kind of force you together where they can give each other mutual support, but they won't call the police for any kind of problems that they may have that the police can solve. So, considering ideas of cross-cultural communication, finding members of those underserved communities that will be willing to come forward to provide that cultural education to our officers. If we walk into, it's very possible in a different culture to walk into a scene and just unintentionally do something, talk to the wrong person, or stand the wrong way, or look at something the wrong way and completely shut that communication down. So again, in that analytical thought of why I would be the best person, I'm looking at things like this cross-cultural communication, bringing people together, different cultures together, not only to train the police department on how we can do things better, but also to act as a 24-hour language bank for us so we don't have any type of misunderstandings should police be called. And then this could eventually become a community thing where you get to know your neighbors, where we can learn from each other. And the police department could become a facilitator for something like that. Some of the other issues, looking at the early intervention system that we have here, for instance. One of the things that I feel would be a good candidate is the fact that, again, in my department, I've been under the hood and saw areas in our department that we were deficient. And one of them was something called the early intervention system. So I took on the lead of that work group to figure out what our thresholds would be for that. How we would recognize an officer who was a potential issue or was going to be a problem for us before they became that problem, before they became that liability issue. These are the things that I think I bring to the table is looking behind the scenes, seeing what's back there, and then trying to figure out a solution for it. Once I've looked at those particular types of areas, putting work groups together of officers of various rank to allow them to solve that particular problem that's been identified. This allows an employee to be valued, to feel valued, to be part of the process, and once they're involved like that, they're less likely to leave, they're less likely to leave for one case somewhere else. And these are people who can develop through the future of the So I know I'm kind of all over the map here, but these are just some of the ideas that I brought in. Looking at the idea of, and I may be a little ignorant on this, but there's no reason why there shouldn't be a regional academy in this area to train our own officers, other than send them to other places in the state. We have law enforcement partners here with Madison County Sheriff's Department. You've got some other larger agencies and smaller agencies to the west of us. There's no reason why we shouldn't have a regional academy. That would be something that I would advocate as a candidate for chief of police. To be able to train our officers to our own standards, to set that particular standard, to set that bar so that every department in the state of Alabama would want to be like us, rather than having to learn from others and bring back here, change whatever type of bad habits we have learned somewhere else to make Madison material. I have here an example of a memorandum of understanding and a mutual aid agreement that we have between all the 7 cities, or the major cities in Virginia that we have. I had asked for a similar type of document here and found out that there isn't one. These are the types of things that, coming from other agencies and experience I've had, that we bring here to ensure that we have more professionalism. We have more expectations. The expectations are already written. We don't run into issues where, should we get called out for a mutual aid type of situation, we're not coordinating properly with other agencies. So, again, these are the things that I'm looking at. Sorry, I ran. I couldn't do that sometimes.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Just appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you
Gandy.
so much.
Appreciate it.